I'm Jeff. I'm with Endless Life Brewing in Brooklyn, New York. I'm originally born in Detroit, but we've been in Brooklyn for almost 20 years now. So that might take a couple steps. Endless Life it comes from the idea that we're trying to build something bigger than ourselves. Hopefully a lot of us are trying to do that, right? That's what we're trying to do with our lives. It's okay to have success in your own little corner, but if you're not sharing that with somebody, then what are we really doing? And particularly with beer, this is all really about community. So the idea is you want to bring as many people in on this as you can, and hopefully if you have success, it's not just your success, it's our success. So that's where the name comes from. But this is going back, if you ask me for the past 30 years, what's your favorite band? The answer is always The Verve. That's sort of my go-to. You like other things at different times with more intensity, but that's sort of the long-standing answer to what's your favorite band. I worked in music stores. I played music out at bars and clubs, so have that terrible moniker of DJ attached to myself. I did that for many, many years before I found beer and got into that. And music has sort of just always been a through line. Obviously before beer, but once you find beer, a lot of my beer names kind of come from either pulling a lyric or pulling a song name, or taking that and sort of jumping off. So Endless Life is a song name from The Verve. When it came time to open my own place, I was like, you gotta come up with a good name, something that means something more than just, what those words are and what they mean to you. So I had a short list of names, kind of sat with them for a while, and I felt like that was the one that stuck with me the most, and I thought it also probably had the most potential for, every single person that comes across that name, for them to be able to put their own meaning to it. So, everybody's then a little bit more personally invested in what they're doing. Everybody can have their own vibe about what Endless Life means to them. But to me, it's about community, building something bigger than yourself, hopefully building a nice community where everybody can share and get a win together. Without community, I wouldn't be doing this. I'd either still be in music or I would have found something else. I'd be baking or working as a line cook or something, who knows. I brewed my very first beer at home. I loved it. I knew I wanted to do more of that. I knew that I had found something that I was going to do the rest of my life. But without community, that would have just been me still homebrewing, every week for myself, and just enjoying it in my own home. But as soon as I brewed the first time, I get online, get on Google, and find a homebrew club near me. So 2 weeks after I brewed my first batch, I'm sitting in the backyard of Bowery Lane up in Greenpoint and just kind of amazed. I'm like a little kid and I'm like, man, there are 20, then 30, then 40 people in this backyard. These are now my mentors. They don't know it yet, right? I'm like, holy crap, I have everything to learn. These people have been doing this for however long, but longer than me. I'm brand new. All I want to do is just sponge up everything that they have, right? And you do, and I totally went down the rabbit hole. It's just learn. But, sitting in those, sitting out in that backyard when it's warm out, sitting inside in that room with them when it was cooler, month after month, you start to have relationships with these people that were based in beer. That was the reason we were all there. But you start to have all these other attachments. Obviously, the musical attachment, you find different things that you can talk with the other brewers about, but you start learning about their lives and where you intersect, and it starts to become this bigger thing. But I knew that first time I sat in, that backyard with all these other brewers, this is much more than just me making beer and them making beer and us trading notes. This was very much like a vibe. We were very much hanging out together and looking for something in each other. There was something about that community that just meant everything. So right from the beginning, right from home brewing, it was community. So when you start to get your foot in the door, work at other breweries, then you start to figure out that there's this New York City Brewers Guild. So it's essentially like the Home Brewers Club, the homebrew meetings, but now it's a bunch of professionals. So it's the same thing. You walk into that room and it's just, oh man, I have so much to learn. All these people are great. Everybody in this whole community just shares with each other. The knowledge just goes back and forth. And it was just everything I was sort of always looking for, right? Like, it was cool when you were hanging out in a record store and you'd have the other employees and you kind of had your own little crew and your shorthand, and you knew who liked what and sort of where you fit in. And you could kind of find that with some customers, the ones that would come in regularly. But it was just never as tight knit and never as wide ranging as, when you got into the homebrew club, into that room, and when you get into the New York City Brewers Guild. And it's just, all that warmth, all that generosity, all that sharing of knowledge, There's no way I would be where I was in my career, let alone have the knowledge or the confidence to, take that leap and start your own thing. It just wouldn't happen without all those other people in the community. It's everything. It was a lot of fun early on to sort of learn about the ingredients. Really early on, I started working at a homebrew shop. And just the way I started brewing was almost like running experiments more than I'm going to brew this crazy idea and see how it goes just for me or anything like that. It was always like, I learned early on that yeast was sort of the thing that really created flavor in beer. Like, you can load things up with hops, you can make malty beers, love all that. But for me, the most interesting things were always the yeast-driven beers. So, preview, years down the line, that's how Endless Life ends up, we make lagers, we make saisons, we make sours. That's sort of our focus. To me, all of those are very yeast-driven beers. Most of your flavor and most of your control over that beer, most of your decisions are about the yeast and what's best for it. How can you push it in different directions? But really early on, I figured out that, while I'm standing in front of my stove for, a few hours, I can make one beer out of that, or I could take that and I can split it 2 or 3 ways. I can pitch different yeast, and now all of a sudden, I have 3 different beers, and I can learn what 3 different yeasts do to the same exact beer. So, it doesn't take very long, especially if you start brewing like twice a week, like a maniac. You start to learn how these different ingredients influence the flavor of your beers, and how the different parts that they all play, how they interchange with each other and come together to make, what ends up in that glass. And then it was not long after that my buddy, my now buddy, Ted Hawley up at New York Craft Malt in Batavia, we started carrying his malt at the homebrew shop. I started brewing with that at home. One of the early people that I met at the homebrew club at the Brooklyn Bruisers was Chris Prout, and he used to take his old beat up blue pickup and he used to drive up to Valley Malt, load the back of it up with Valley Malt, which is not malted in New York, but Andrea was the first one taking New York grown grain, taking it out of state, malting it, and then we were bringing it back. So that was the original New York ingredient, right? And then Ted starts malting with, in Batavia, in New York, with grain grown in New York. So it's this early evolution. And I was just lucky enough to know Chris initially, that we got Valley Malt in our hands as a home brewer. So he'd load that up, bring it back, and the home brewers would just divvy it up. And so because of his passion for that sort of farm to glass idea and exploration of local ingredients, he got a whole group of us within the Brooklyn Bruisers homebrew group brewing with local ingredients. So a lot of credit to him, and then a lot of credit to Ted, and then Ben and Danielle, who owned Brooklyn Homebrew, the homebrew shop I worked at. They started bringing Ted's malt in so that, it's right there. So I'd start writing recipes. Of course, I'm going to use the New York malt that we have sitting right over there. So as a home brewer, I was lucky enough, just through circumstance, to start using it. But you kind of go year upon year upon year, having a lot of fun and brewing really good beers with ingredients that you're getting from all over the world. And if you want to make a German lager, well, get your malt from Germany, get your hops from Germany, buy a yeast that is really attached and synonymous with a German brewer. You can do all those things, but the problem is, that's great, but where's your attachment to that? Like, you're getting your hands dirty, you're putting in the sweat, and you're making a beer physically, but what does that say about you? What does that say about where you're at? How are we sort of portraying, like, how New York is it to make a beer when you get all your stuff from people you'll never meet? And just send it over to me and I'll approximate the beer that you're making over there in Germany. That's cool. That's really cool. I love those beers. I still hunt them down, love it when I sit down. I'll drink that all afternoon. But if I'm gonna put all of myself into this project and create your own brewery, start something up of your own, I want it to reflect where I'm at, Like, we live in New York. We are super lucky that we're in one of the only places in the entire world where, within this state, within these lines that they drew for us, there are people that grow barley and wheat and corn and oats. There are a couple people who have taken it upon themselves to learn their craft, to learn how to malt and get it to a level that I think competes with some of the best in the world. We're lucky enough that not only do we have that, but we also have the other side of it where we can grow hops in a few different places throughout this state. And there are just so few people who are able to live in a place and create beers with, with malt and hops from within a certain range. I think it's just an opportunity that would just be, crying out for more people to play with this. Like I say, I love those, sort of traditional beers made in a traditional way, but we have the opportunity to show you what it would taste like if we took those ideas and interpreted them with ingredients that are grown right near us. So instead of just that German lager, now it's a German lager, but with New York ingredients. So it's like a truly unique experience. I think it's really fun to sort of play at the edges of that and see where those flavors lead you. You can sort of be inspired by a German beer, but you're using New York ingredients, so now it's going to take you into this place that's at least tangential to that. But where does that go? All of these beers that are to style, they all started out of what was local to them, what was available to them. In times of hardship, what was available and required because you couldn't get your hands on anything, or there wasn't enough supply of some of these other things from further afield. So you just create what you can out of necessity, out of what's available to you. And I think instead of being forced into that, like, we have that opportunity. So, we're not doing it because we're crammed down in a box and we can't get all of these other ingredients, but we have the opportunity to do this. So for me, it's really exciting to be able to push forward with that and see where that leads us. Endless Life is 5 years old, a little over. Home brewing, probably 5 years more than that, but so call it maybe 10 years that I've been working with local ingredients. I still feel like we're kind of at the very first couple footsteps of that. We've made a lot of progress over the years. There's a lot of knowledge between a few of us that have really put the time in with this. But I mean, you're talking about like decades and centuries for these other styles and these other places. It's really exciting to sort of be at the forefront of that and to be able to have relationships with the growers, with the farmers, with the people that grow and process the hops. Ted Hawley up at New York Craft Malt, him and his wife Patty, they're doing an incredible thing. But over the years, just working so closely with them, being able to pick up the phone and be like, "Hey Ted, what about if we take this malt and we push it a little bit in this direction?" And to be able to get some response in that. Try to do that with like one of the to keep the the example going. You try to do that with a maltster in Germany as a tiny little brewer in New York, you're not going to get anywhere with that. But you know, we can have that back and forth and actually have some influence on how these things are going. But I think it's super exciting that we're at the very, very beginning of this, and there's so many places that this could go. So, I don't know. I get excited about it. You know, you tip your hat to somebody like Jason at Strongroad, who's sort of our local, like, OG dedication to using all New York ingredients and pushing that knowledge forward. And then a couple of the lovely people that have sort of come into our group more recently. And it's just nice to have that group of people to work with them and to sort of be at the front of something and being really excited about where that could go and seeing where everybody's own interpretation of that can be and where it can lead us all. So we kind of covered that pretty thoroughly. Yeah, I definitely think so. You know, it's in the way that as a brewer, I might be influenced by, you know, brew a Belgian triple or brew a German lager or brew an English mild. You know, you can do your interpretation of that with the ingredients from those areas and do it the way it's been done. And I think it's really good to learn that way. But when you start taking your interpretation of a Belgian double and trying to use New York ingredients to achieve that, it's always going to set you off on another path. You can get something that, you know, we might share with each other and go, oh yeah, this reminds me of a Belgian double. This is close to it. Belgian might be a little tricky because there's so much variation, but you know, if you're trying to nail like an English style, you can do a pretty good job with New York ingredients, but there's always going to be something, in my opinion, beautifully different about that. There's something just a little unique and just a little bit more, it just requires a little bit more of your thought, you know, while you're drinking it. It's not just it's not a commodity anymore. It's not just, oh, it's just another mild. It's like, oh, there's something about this that's really interesting. What is it that makes it that way? What are these unique things, and how, you know, if we took a little left turn here, maybe now we have a different style. That's something totally New York. You know, I think we're all sort of playing in that area, and I think it'll be exciting when we kind of hit upon something where collectively we're all like, oh man, there's this basically new style. We've just done a thing that's never been done, and you can only do it with these New York ingredients. If that happens and we all fall in love with the style, and we, you know, if the people that drink the beer enjoy it the way that we do, I mean, I think that's when we can sort of put a feather in our cap and be like, man, we just did a thing. This is really cool. So it's the excitement of striving towards that. But yeah, absolutely. The flavors are unique. Absolutely. When I'm at a festival, you know, when I'm trying to sum up who we are and what we're doing, I always try to say that, with very few exceptions, you know, we'll make a couple really large beers every once in a while. It's fun to do, but for the most part, we're trying to make really sessionable beers. So I say we make sessionable beers, and we make beer flavored beer. It doesn't mean boring. It just means, you know, maybe a little more restraint. We're not trying to throw, you know, 5 ingredients into a beer that are sort of outside the normal, what you'd consider, you know, normal ingredients, the malt, hops, yeast, and water. There's room for everything, and I love it. And I love that people push boundaries and they try some wild things. I love extreme flavors. It's really cool. It's a huge part of what drove this industry, and you know, is the reason that there are 9,000 or 10,000 breweries in this country right now. It's really exciting. But to me, I think, you know, that's good as an experiment. It's good to do once. It's good to have a taste of it. But I just always found myself going back to brewing really classic styles. You know, when I look at a menu, I always joke with the people that I'm with that my brain doesn't even register all the crazy things. You know, I might come back and make a note of it and be like, oh, that's wild, that's fun. But, you know, my brain's just looking for those like classic things. I want subtlety. I want beers that would brewed with like a lot of intent, a lot of care, and just a lot of attention to detail. And I think that I find when I'm drinking that I'm more interested in a beer that is a lot more subtle, that you know that they had to hit a lot of things the right way to make sure that that beer tastes as good as it does. And for some people that's really simple, and it might be boring to continually drink that way. But I love finding the nuance in those beers, and I love just finding one, sessioning it, you know. It's really good to have one. What if you had 3, 4, 5? Like, you know, what if it starts to warm up a little? How different is that beer in the glass than it was 10 minutes ago when it was super cold when it was served to you? You know, after your palate adjusts, and, you know, after your environment adjusts a little bit, after you settle in and hopefully you're having some good conversation, you're finding something in that 4th or 5th beer that maybe you didn't in that first, and sort of keeping your brain engaged with what you're doing. To me, those are the best beers. So I always joke that I'm making beer flavored beer, and I always also sort of say that I'm trying to thread the needle in between, you know, being exciting enough and interesting enough that you can sit with your friends. You can sit there and you can think about that beer and have 1, 2, 3, 4 and really engage with that beer. There's enough interesting things happening. And then the flip side of that is, if we're just sitting and having a conversation, this beer doesn't require your attention. It's not screaming at you. We can sit and we can have a few over a good conversation, and maybe if there's a lull, or if one of us gets up to get another, and you just kind of dawns on you then, this beer's really good. Like, it doesn't have to be the star, it doesn't have to scream and hold our attention, but there's something about this that we keep going back to it, and it's the perfect, it's not disrupting our conversation, it's the perfect companion for what we're doing here. It's tricky. I decided to do these things and then realized the problem with it is, how do you express what you've done? Like, how do you take somebody, like, how do you take my parents and explain what you just asked? How do you explain to my parents what is a mixed fermentation beer? What's a saison? If you have a few minutes, you kind of go, well, let me explain every other style in the world to you, and then saison's everything that we didn't just talk about. It's like the catch-all of everything that's sort of farmhousey and weird and quirky and unique, that didn't neatly fit into all these other classic styles that we can describe and like totally nail down and put a thumb on. So it's tricky. I have not found a very good quick summation of how to do it. You know, to me a saison has to be a mixed fermentation beer, which means when you're making a lager or a normal, you know, sort of standard ale, one of the main things is that you isolate a single strain of yeast and you propagate that, but you find one specific cell of yeast and multiply it so where they're all exactly the same, and we just use one strain of yeast to brew a beer, start to finish. That's it. And you can brew a lot of styles with that, but, you know, kind of all happen within a range. And all within, you know, a certain, you know, genotype. You know, Saccharomyces cerevisiae. It's one specific range of types of yeast. When we start talking about mixed fermentation, and what, in my opinion, no hate for everything else, but in my opinion, if you're going to brew a saison, it really needs to be a mixed fermentation. I think we kind of had, you know, one wave of saison in sort of the brew pub days, or sort of the aftermath of the brew pub days, where everybody was sort of brewing to color, you know, instead of flavor. You might have one strain of yeast that you use, and you're just brewing different, you know, different malts, and you kind of have your blonde and your golden and your amber. You start getting into stouts, and you're kind of brewing by color more than you are brewing by flavor or style or any kind of inspiration. And I think there were some adventurous people in that era who were making saison with like one single saison strain in stainless steel, treating it exactly like every other kind of beer that they make, every other kind of ale or lager that they make. And those came out really, really one note, often really phenolic, kind of peppery, maybe really bubblegummy, but really one note regardless. And always an expression of the yeast that was single note and you know, losing all the subtlety of any kind of yeast character, usually not showcasing the malt, usually not showcasing any kind of hops, no kind of adjunct, no kind of fun of what does it taste like if you put some wheat in here, what if we, you know, do some rye. And I had such a visceral reaction to that when I started drinking beer and thinking about styles. And then you come across saisons that are made with mixed fermentation, and they're using, you know, probably multiple strains of saison yeast. Then you're adding in some Brettanomyces, which can get really funky, and back in the day was like really barnyardy, really funky, really crazy. After you have a few of those, you realize these strains can also do some really fruity things that are maybe a little bit more desirable and kind of fit in with the saison expression a little more. So you got multiple saison strains, multiple Brettanomyces strains, and then I think if you add a little bit of lactobacillus and get the beer a little bit tart, add a little bit of sourness to it, and you've got this yeast expression that kind of hits so many different notes. It's really complex, really layered, and just a little bit more interesting to drink than like a one-note beer that gets really boring after a couple of sips. Then you start to add in the fact that you can kind of bottle condition these things and maybe sit on them for a while, and what you drink when it's fresh is really nice and complex, but maybe 6 months or a year down the line you pull another bottle out and it's changed quite a bit. You know, the idea that beer is a living, breathing thing, that it's, you know, an agricultural product, to be able to embrace all those complexities, nuances, and variations, I think is a beautiful thing. I think that's why we're doing what we're doing. I think it's amazing to have macro brewers, like macro lagers. It's an engineering feat to have a beer brewed in 30 different places all across the world, and somehow with different water sources and different equipment, and somehow or other, you put those beers side by side and they taste exactly the same. Hats off. Like, that is an absolute marvel of modern engineering, science. It's incredible. That's not the path that I want to go down. Like, we're deliberately small, we're deliberately hands-on, we're using New York ingredients because of those relationships with the farmers and the maltsters and the hop growers. It's just a further instance of how can we make something that's really unique, and how can we make something that's of this place. So I think using mixed fermentation is just a way to sort of push all this and, you know, find new flavors, find new ways of making beers, even if they go back to really simple ideas and processes and procedures that people have been doing on their farms for hundreds of years, you know. It's just sort of following that path versus the super sciencey, super straightforward, absolute, you know, modern marvels. Just a different way of going about it. I don't think I succinctly answered your question at all as I babbled on, but I think with saison and mixed fermentation, you're also usually getting something that's really, really dry. You know, hopefully pretty fruity, pretty flavorful, and just, you know, pretty complex. A lot of patience, I hope. Didn't always demonstrate consistently. Sorry to all the owners who had to put up with me over the years. I think, you know, every single place that I worked before this taught me a whole lot, or gave me the opportunity to learn a whole lot. Not only working with others and working with different management styles, but just being physically in, you know, using different brewing setups, different brew houses, different sizes, completely different makers of the equipment. You know, every single place you kind of get in. You know, if it's one of the places that people worked before I was there, then you kind of come in, you learn the way that they've been doing it, which is cool. It's really cool to watch somebody else teach you how their mind works, you know, given this puzzle. You know, you have this set of equipment and you're trying to do, you know, X, Y, and Z beer. This is how they decided was the best way to go about getting from here to there. So it's really cool look inside of somebody's brain and how it works and how they got there. And then you get to kind of come in, you learn their way, and then after a number of iterations, your brain starts working and you're like, what if we change this and that? So it's really fun if you can have somebody that was already there, you come in and learn their way, and then they stick around, and if you can kind of iterate back and forth, you know, they might stop you from making a big mistake and be like, I might go, hey, what if we do this? And you go, we tried that. We don't need to make that mistake again. It's really cool to save you from that. But it still sort of answers your question. Your brain can go back to, you know, okay, let's do it this way then. But it's really fun to just sort of iterate and constantly improve your process. 'Cause I think ultimately, you know, you can walk into a place with some experience, you can walk into a brand new place and you can get a beer in the end. And I think most of us will be able to get a pretty good beer in the end. But I think when you're really trying to improve your beer and really trying to, you know, express the ideas that you want in your finished beer, the only way you're getting there is if you really just do the repetitions and do the iterations, constantly try to tweak this little bit and that little bit. And it might seem really, really tiny. You might not even taste that change in that beer that you brewed today when you taste it a few weeks down the line or a year down the line if it's a sour beer. But by that iteration, you know, you start adding those upon each other, and all of a sudden you're starting to create a whole process or set of processes that lead you somewhere completely new or allow you to sort of break through. Instead of just making good beer, now you're making better than good beer, maybe great beer, you know, constantly trying to achieve better and better and better. And I think working in all those places, you sort of gather up all these experiences and all these ways of thinking about how do you go about a process and why certain things work and why they don't. And then you end up on your own in your own spot and you're working on brand new equipment that you've never worked with. So you got to go through all of that again, but you're sort of, you know, you're sort of hit the ground running. You have this whole set of experiences that you've learned. And you've got, you know, all these different processes that you can pull from and pick the best way forward, hopefully. And then you iterate and kind of keep moving. I think that's one of the things I like the most about beer is that I knew the very first time I brewed that there was an amount of knowledge out there that you were never going to learn at all. And to me, that's the best thing in the world. If I'm going to do something for the rest of my life, the most boring thing I can think of is that you learn all of it, and that's it. There's a finite set of knowledge, and at some point you've learned it all, and where do you go from there? You just keep going into work every day and doing that thing and never learning anything new. That sounds like slow death to me. So like the idea that when you get into beer, there's just an unlearnable amount of knowledge out there, and you know, so many different ways to go about trying to achieve the same thing. It's beautiful. You can just keep learning, keep trying to do things in a different way. It's just you're never going to get there. It's the constant chase to every day try to make that beer a little bit better. Every time you brew a beer that you brewed before, you have the chance to try to like make it just a little bit better than you did the last time. Yeah, and to have those things add up, and hopefully all of your beers start to move in the right direction over a period of time, and you can sort of feel that. You sit down, you have a few beers, and you're like, man, I think these are actually in a better place than they were 6 months ago. You know, I think those are the ways that you feel like you're actually getting somewhere. To me, that's achievement. It's cool winning medals. It's cool getting recognition. It's really cool when another brewer comes in and has your beer and, you know, gives you a pat on the back. But I think it's got to come from within you, or you're never going to keep moving forward. But to be able to sit down and know that you've sort of moved things forward, that you've had a little bit of a breakthrough, you're in a good spot, things are moving in the right way, like, that's it. That's the feeling. That's the reason that you kind of keep getting up and keep coming in, keep beating your head against a wall, keep dealing with all the broken equipment, all the things that go wrong. Like, that's the payoff for all those struggles is, you know, a better beer. A better beer somewhere down the line. I think the very first time that I brewed, I enjoyed the process enough that I knew that I was going to continue doing that. And like I said before, that might have just meant doing it at home for the rest of my life. But I think it probably happened that first time that I was in that backyard with all the other homebrewers. And as soon as those first conversations start happening, all those things that we just talked about like the endless amount of knowledge that is out there to be gained. The fact that, all these people have some level, you can recognize the excitement that you have in yourself and all the other folks in that space. And their willingness to share with me the same way that I was excited to share whatever little bit I knew at that point in time. I think it was then. I think I knew really early on that this is something I wanted to do, and I've just sort of always had a hard enough head and a desire to kind of go down my own path that, I realized that like you can do this, and this can be something that you pour yourself into for the rest of your life. And you can either do that for somebody else, or you can do it for yourself. And in doing it for yourself, hopefully for others, but not breaking your back for somebody else's benefit. Hopefully breaking your back for many people's benefit and the people you choose. But I think those sparks were there, and I think that groundwork was there almost right from the very, very beginning. I'm not trying to cut you off. It's occurring to me that, you also realize when you're working for somebody else and within their parameters, you can be really happy doing a lot of the things day to day. But if either it's being lost at the bar that you don't have any control over, that it's being, you can make a beer that you're really proud of, and if it's being served in a way that you're not really happy with, or if the hospitality isn't how you would want people to be treated in your space, or if the marketing is just strange, if the labels aren't really resonating with you, like there are just so many pieces along the way that affect the way that beer is perceived by the person drinking it, that I think you become very precious. You start putting so many hours in, by choice, to try to make this thing as good as it possibly can be for your skills and your situation at that point in time. And then you it sort of breaks your heart to see it served in a dirty glass, or to see somebody come in excited and have them be ignored by a bartender for too long until they get their beer. And you just know that their experience isn't what you were hoping it was the whole time you were putting all that work in to give them something really lovely at the end. And so I think that's the other part of it, is that you just want control over all of it. I wanted control over all of it, so that people walked in and were greeted and treated properly, that you were serving them beer in the right way, in a properly clean glass, playing some good music in the background, so they weren't like, everything's great, but why are they playing? I won't shoot any shots at anybody, but why are they playing this awful music? It doesn't fit this space. Like, there's so many things that can just put you off of a great experience, or have it fall just shy of where it could be. It's, the ideal is you can have control over all of it. Let's give everybody the most perfect experience you can possibly put together for them. That's a tricky one. I think that, sort of to give you the festival talk is, we make sessionable beers, we make beer flavored beer, we make really approachable beer. I'd like to think that almost anybody could sit down and enjoy at least a little bit of any of the beers that we make. I think it's rare that we make something that is very extreme, or pushing the flavor boundaries, or making something that's so divisive. That's just not who we are and what we're doing. There's room for all that, but that's just not what we do. So I would like to think that most people, if they enjoy flavors, if they enjoy eating, if they enjoy other beverages, if they're coming to beer new, I'd like to think that we're approachable enough and that almost anything would at least be acceptable to them. And then you can start talking about why they're perceiving what they're perceiving. You can start to talk about and learn about beer in some conversation after that, and using that beer as a jumping off point. Maybe I can find something you like better, but I'd like to think that anything works. It's been a lot of fun, when we make saison and sours. If you get somebody that comes in and might like cocktails, but particularly if they might come from a pretty deep wine background, I think that you can sort of put a sour or a saison in front of them, and it might be a little bit more approachable. There might be flavors in there that they can kind of connect with they aren't going to find in a lager, which might be, all they've been exposed to, and might be why they have chosen to drink more wine than lager to this point. And I think that's fun. Like, they don't have to walk out a beer drinker. I'm not trying to change the direction of their life, but if they know next time that they walk into a place, oh, I like that one thing that one person showed me. Maybe now their world's a little wider. Maybe they can walk in and be more comfortable in a beer bar. Maybe if they're with a group, sometimes it feels a little bit better if everybody's having a beer, like, well, I found the one beer that I do like, or that one style, or the one jumping off point. Now I can be a little bit more part of that group and not feel like, well, everybody's having beer and I'm the one person drinking wine. If you can kind of give them that trick to get in the door, or to sort of commune a little bit more closely with the people they're hanging out with. I don't know, that's pretty cool. I'm kind of perpetually excited by what's coming up next, even if it's stuff we've done before, just that iteration. And I tried that one thing, and I'm really excited to see how that turns out. But yeah, absolutely. We just made a beer with Spicy Moon. Eric came over here, and we brewed a saison. So we utilized some of the barrels back there. So I'm really excited about that. We're doing a release very quickly here. At the time we're speaking, in the next week, we're gonna put that saison across a couple different Spicy Moon locations, so that'll be fun. We're about to get Pink Boots in. We did a whole series of beers with them a couple years ago, using honey in different ways, so that was really cool. But with the move and just sort of getting our legs under us, we just haven't had the opportunity to do very many collabs lately. So we have Pink Boots coming back in the next couple of weeks. So that'll be a lot of fun. Always look forward to having them in-house. That's a killer. We are super lucky that once the laws changed and once people started opening breweries in New York City, it was sort of just the floodgates opened, and there were so many talented people that were brewing at home who just could not make or did not want to try to find all of the money that they needed to open a brewery in the only way that you sort of got pigeonholed into opening it before the laws changed. In 2013, they passed legislation to allow somebody who brewed beer to serve a beer to somebody in their own space. Before that, you had to go into distribution. You could self-distribute, but you had to go into distribution, which means you're making a very, very small margin on the beer that you're selling to a bar or a restaurant, and they get to make a lot of money off of that. And you add that to the price of real estate in New York, and it meant the only way you could do this was super small margin, meant super high volume, which meant really large batches, which just means loads of money. When they changed the law, all of a sudden it became possible. We wouldn't exist. We would have never opened a brewery. Endless Life would not be a brewery if that law hadn't changed. I cannot sell enough saison and sour beer into the world to make a couple $1 million project happen. we're small deliberately so that we can make the kind of beer that we want to make. But some of the beauty that, that allows me to do that also allows people to make larger breweries than what we are, but not have to be like multi-million-dollar projects. So I think the only way I can answer what my favorite breweries are is to be like, there's different tiers. So you have Wild East and Grimm are making the best beer in the city, in my opinion. Absolute, just top notch across a number of styles each. They just kill it. You just know that every single beer that they hand you, it's going to be damn near world class. Just absolutely beautiful. The fact that we use 100% New York State ingredients, I have so much love for Jason Saylor and what Strong Oak has done over the years. The amount of education that I've, gleaned from him and his brewers, the back and forth that we've had, the amount of, talk about, if we're making a Vienna lager, do we call it a Vienna lager? Like, what does that even mean if we're using New York ingredients? So those conversations can just go hours at a time and then pick right back up next time and just continue for years. But I absolutely love him. I love Strong Oak. What they're doing is incredible. It's been really beautiful to have Johnny from Nightglow come into our community. He's a lovely person, and his take on using New York ingredients and what that means and how he executes that, how he goes from the New York ingredients to what he puts in a glass is really beautiful, and it's something that Jason and I aren't doing. It's a really nice, unique take, and he's just one of the best people, so it's been really nice to have him come in and be a part of this. So I'd have to definitely include them. And then it's really cool to know that there are a couple other people who are playing at the edges of this, who are having conversations with ownership about, is it worth it to pay almost twice as much to bring these grains in? But I think, I think Eric at Spicy Moon, I think Bobby at Sound and Fury, and a couple others. But I think it's exciting to know that there are other people that are, that I already like as individuals and love the beers that they make, but to have them start to play a little bit, and maybe a little bit more than a little bit, with New York ingredients is really exciting. So I definitely want to give a shout out to them, and hopefully we'll see more New York ingredient beers from them as well. Probably shouted out everybody that I love in this community. Just thank you to you guys. It is so important. We can do what we do, but it's kind of like shouting into the void at some point. It's just, we only have the interaction with the people that come in to our space. The excitement and the enthusiasm, the ability to find some new folks, through what you guys are doing. It's really important, especially, I feel like I came up in a time when it was just growth, and just total excitement. You could get anybody across the 5 boroughs for any crazy idea you had, and just pack a place and lines out the door for certain breweries and certain ideas. It's been nice to kind of have it shrink back down and kind of, we all get sort of into our own space and have to think a little bit more about what we're doing and how we're doing it. But you guys are giving us the opportunity to sort of talk to new people. So yeah, just thank you guys for doing that. And to anybody who, supported us directly, but the community as a whole over the years, thank you. If you're seeing this and maybe you aren't going out as much as you used to, that's cool, but I don't know. Maybe this weekend grab a friend and grab a pint, get back out there, say hi.